Imagine everything in your life seems perfect. A happy family, a new baby, and endless dreams for the future. But then, something happens that turns your entire world upside down. One mother found herself in this exact situation, and what she faced next will leave you speechless. Stay with us until the end to see how this unbelievable story unfolds. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. The sun streamed through the living room window, casting a warm glow on the faces of the Smith family. It was a day filled with joy and anticipation as Stephanie Smith, her husband Marcus, and their 6-year-old daughter Layla prepared to welcome a new member into their family. Their modest home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood of one of the southern states of America, was filled with laughter, love, and a shared excitement for the arrival of their newborn son. Stephanie, a proud black mother, held her belly with a mixture of pride and hope. She had endured months of discomfort, doctor's appointments, and sleepless nights, but today made it all worth it. Her baby boy, Sergio, was born healthy and strong. The nurses smiled as they laid him on her chest, and she wept tears of joy. Marcus stood by her side holding her hand, his eyes full of pride. Layla leaned forward, wide-eyed and curious, gazing at her new baby brother. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of feedings, late nights, and constant care. Sergio was the light of the house, filling every room with his soft cries and baby giggles. Stephanie and Marcus took turns caring for him while also balancing their attention for Layla. It wasn't easy, but they were happy. Life was finally going right. As a black family in a world that often seemed to be against them, having this peaceful moment felt like a small victory. Stephanie, Marcus, Layla, and baby Sergio were a unit, unstoppable and full of love. 3 months later, that peace began to crumble. It started as something so small that it was easy to dismiss, a faint red rash on Sergio's arm. Stephanie noticed it one morning while changing his diaper. It was just a tiny patch of dry skin, barely noticeable. "Probably just heat rash," Marcus said with a shrug. "Babies get those all the time." Stephanie nodded, but the mother in her couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. She decided to keep an eye on it. Over the next few days, the small red patch didn't go away. It grew larger, spreading down his arm and onto his chest. When she touched it, Sergio winced and began to cry. Her concern grew. Stephanie and Marcus took him to the pediatrician, a man in his mid-50s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He examined the baby for a few minutes before giving his diagnosis. "It's eczema," the doctor announced with an air of confidence. "It's very common in infants, especially for black children. Their skin is more prone to dryness and irritation." He prescribed a low-dose steroid cream and assured them it was completely safe. "Use it twice a day, and it should clear up in no time," he said with a smile. The assurance from a medical professional eased their worries, and for a moment, Stephanie felt relief. She bought the cream, applied it to Sergio's skin as directed, and within days, the redness faded. The rash seemed to be gone. She felt a small sense of victory, but it was short-lived. 1 week later, the rash returned with a vengeance. This time, it wasn't just a patch. It spread across his chest, down his back, and onto his legs. The bright red hue of his skin was impossible to miss. It looked raw, like his skin had been burned. Stephanie's heart ached every time she looked at him. His baby giggles had turned into constant whimpers, his once peaceful sleep now disturbed by fits of crying. Marcus stayed up with her at night, pacing the room with Sergio in his arms, whispering soothing words. Layla, too young to fully understand, asked her mom, "Is Sergio sick, Mommy? Will he be okay?" Stephanie forced a smile. "Yes, baby, he'll be just fine." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. They returned to the doctor, this time more desperate for answers. The doctor repeated his initial diagnosis. "It's still eczema," he said firmly, scribbling notes on his clipboard. "This happens sometimes. It flares up, but we just need to use a stronger dose of the steroid cream." He adjusted the prescription to a higher strength and sent them home with a reminder to apply it consistently. "The key is not to miss a day," he added. Stephanie wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered in her mind. This cycle continued for weeks. Apply the cream, watch the rash fade, only for it to come back worse. Apply it again. Watch it fade. Repeat. Each time it returned, it seemed angrier, redder, and more painful for little Sergio. He scratched at his arms and legs until his nails left tiny cuts on his delicate skin. The sight of her baby suffering left Stephanie in tears. Her once vibrant, joyful baby had become tired and irritable. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes. His body, once so full of baby fat and warmth, now looked fragile and worn. She stayed up at night, rocking him in her arms, her heart breaking every time he cried. Her worst fears became reality one night when Sergio woke up screaming in pain. His body was hotter than ever before, his tiny frame trembling from the fever. Stephanie's hands shook as she called Marcus, and they rushed to the hospital. Nurses and doctors swarmed around them as they tried to stabilize his temperature. They hooked him up to IVs, checked his heart rate, and examined his raw, blistered skin. They were admitted to the hospital, and Sergio was kept under observation for 5 days. It was 5 days of endless worry, sleepless nights, and silent prayers. Stephanie sat by his bedside, refusing to leave, even when the nurses urged her to go home for rest. When they were finally discharged, they were sent home with another prescription, this time for injectable steroids. The doctor explained how to administer the shots and warned them to follow the schedule closely. At first, it seemed to work. Sergio's rash faded, his skin looked less irritated, and he began smiling again. Stephanie thought, maybe this time it's really over. But she was wrong. Within a week, the rash returned. This time it was unlike anything they had ever seen. His skin turned a deep, angry red as if his entire body was on fire. His small hands and feet swelled, and he cried until he had no energy left to make a sound. His body was so fragile that even a gentle touch from his mother's hand caused his skin to blister and peel. Stephanie wrapped him in layers of soft gauze, covering every inch of his body. She rocked him as he whimpered. Her tears soaked into the gauze as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Her heart was shattered. The worst part was the looks they got from people outside. Whenever Stephanie left the house with Sergio wrapped in gauze, strangers stared at them with disgust and suspicion. "Did he get burned?" one woman asked rudely in the grocery store parking lot. Another person whispered, "I bet they did that to him. Poor baby." Stephanie's heart filled with rage and shame. People didn't see a struggling mother. They saw a black woman who, in their eyes, must have hurt her child. Marcus told her to ignore them, but their judgment weighed on her. Soon, she stopped going out entirely. No more grocery runs, no more visits to friends. Their home became a prison where she, Marcus, Layla, and Sergio lived in isolation. Her faith was crumbling. At night, Stephanie sat alone in the living room, praying to God with tears running down her face. Her prayers were raw, desperate, and painful. "Please, Lord, take me instead. Let him live. I'll do anything. Just let him live." She wept until there was no tears left. The first chapter closes with Stephanie looking at her son sleeping in his bed, wrapped in gauze like a fragile porcelain doll. Her face is worn from sleepless nights, but her eyes are fierce with determination. "I'll find a way," she whispers to herself, her hands clenched into fists. "I'll find a way, Sergio. I promise." Days blurred into nights as the Smith household turned into a place of constant worry and exhaustion. The living room, once a space filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a battlefield. Stephanie barely slept. Her eyes, once full of life, were now sunken and framed with dark circles. Every moment revolved around Sergio's condition. His cries pierced the air at all hours, sharp and unrelenting. Layla sat quietly on the couch, hugging her teddy bear, watching her mother pace the room with Sergio wrapped in gauze like a fragile, broken doll. The sight of her mother's tears frightened her, but she didn't say anything. She didn't know how to comfort her. Stephanie felt like she was losing her mind. Every doctor she called gave her the same answer: "Keep using the cream. It's just eczema." But this wasn't eczema. She knew it. Her mother's intuition told her something was terribly wrong. The rash was no longer just a rash. It had become an unstoppable force, consuming Sergio's body like a wildfire. His skin wasn't just red. It was raw, blistered, and bleeding in some places. Even his tiny hands had started to swell. He scratched at himself, his baby nails breaking through his own skin, leaving deep, painful cuts. Stephanie watched helplessly as he suffered. On the worst night yet, Sergio's fever shot up to 104 degrees. His tiny body was boiling hot to the touch. His eyes, once bright and full of innocence, were now dull and heavy-lidded. Stephanie panicked. Her heart pounded in her chest as she called Marcus from the other room. "He's burning up, Marcus! We need to go now!" she shouted, voice cracking with fear. They didn't waste a second. Marcus grabbed the car keys, and Stephanie wrapped Sergio in a soft blanket, holding him tightly against her chest as they ran to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road made Sergio whimper, and every whimper felt like a stab to Stephanie's heart. At the hospital, the emergency room was packed, but one look at Sergio and the nurses knew this was serious. "We'll take him now," one nurse said, eyes wide with concern. Stephanie followed them as they wheeled Sergio away, but a nurse held up her hand. "You have to wait outside," she said firmly. Stephanie froze, her heart aching in protest. No, please, I need to be with him," she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. But the nurse shook her head. "We'll do everything we can. Please wait outside." Stephanie's legs felt like they would give out. She turned to Marcus, who pulled her into a hug, letting her bury her face in his chest. Her body shook with sobs. "Why is this happening to him?" she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "He's just a baby, Marcus. Why's this happening?" Marcus had no answer. He just held her tighter. For 5 agonizing days, Sergio stayed in the hospital. Every morning, Stephanie woke up next to his bed, her eyes stinging from the lack of sleep. She watched as nurses injected steroids into his body and adjusted the IVs in his tiny hands. Doctors came in and out, checking charts, making notes, and giving her the same line she had heard too many times before. "It's eczema, he'll be fine." But nothing about this felt fine. His skin was still red, his face swollen, and the gauze they wrapped him in had to be changed constantly because of the oozing fluid from his skin. Stephanie felt like she was living in a nightmare. On the last day of his stay, one of the doctors pulled Stephanie and Marcus aside. "He's stable now," the doctor said, adjusting his glasses. "We're sending you home with new prescriptions. We've increased the dosage of his steroid injections, and you'll need to administer them at home. Follow the schedule, and you should see an improvement." Stephanie glanced at Marcus. Her heart felt heavy with doubt. She had seen this pattern before. The prescriptions would work for a while, but the rash would come back even worse. But what choice did she have? Every doctor gave her the same answer, and she was too exhausted to fight. They went home with Sergio in his gauze wraps, his little body fragile as ever. Stephanie held him close, feeling his warmth against her chest, the steady thump of his little heartbeat. It was the only thing that gave her peace. Back home, she laid him on the couch and unwrapped the gauze to check his skin. The sight made her stomach turn. Red, cracked, and blistered, it was worse than before. It was as if his skin was fighting to break free from his body. Her heart ached as she gently applied the ointment the hospital gave her. Sergio winced and let out a soft cry. "I know, baby. I know," she said, her voice breaking. She wiped her tears on her sleeve, refusing to cry in front of him again. She had to be strong. The following days were the same. Apply the steroid, watch it work for a moment, then watch the rash return, stronger, angrier. It was like the rash was fighting back. No matter how carefully Stephanie followed the doctor's orders, it never lasted. Every night, she had to rewrap his body in gauze, like she was preparing him for battle. And every night, she watched him squirm in discomfort. She could barely hold him anymore. His skin was too fragile to touch. The only way she could give him love was to sing softly to him while he lay on her lap. Her voice was shaky, but she sang anyway, stroking the air near his head, too afraid to touch him. Layla watched it all happen, her big eyes filled with confusion. "Is he gonna get better, Mommy?" she asked one evening. Stephanie paused, unsure of what to say. She glanced at Marcus, who was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands rubbing his face in frustration. Stephanie knelt down to be at eye level with her daughter. "Yes, baby," she said softly, forcing a smile. "He's going to be okay. We just have to keep taking care of him." Layla nodded, satisfied with the answer, but Stephanie could feel her daughter's doubt. Kids could always sense when something was wrong. It didn't take long for rumors to start. The few times Stephanie left the house with Sergio, strangers stared. They whispered behind her back, pointing at the baby wrapped in gauze. People assumed he had been burned, and some even believed she was the one who hurt him. "Poor baby," an older woman muttered at the grocery store, shaking her head as Stephanie walked past. She should be ashamed. Those words hit Stephanie like a punch to the chest. She walked faster, eyes on the ground, tears threatening to fall. Back in the car, she sat still, gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. "They think I'm a monster," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked over at her. "Forget them, Steph. They don't know you." But his words didn't help. It didn't matter what strangers thought, but it mattered that she felt like a failure. The isolation became unbearable. No visits from family, no outings with friends, just them. Stephanie, Marcus, Layla, and Sergio trapped in a house that felt smaller with every passing day. Stephanie began to break. The exhaustion, the judgment, the helplessness, it all weighed on her shoulders. One night, after another failed attempt to ease Sergio's pain, she sat alone in the living room, knees pulled to her chest, head resting on her arms. She stared at the ceiling, her lips moving in silent prayer. Her voice cracked as she spoke to God. "Please, Lord," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, take me instead. take me. Leave him. He's just a baby. He's just a baby." Her sobs echoed through the quiet house, her body shaken with grief. But something shifted in her that night. Sitting in the silence, something inside her woke up. Her fingers twitched, her breath grew steady, and her eyes narrowed with determination. No more waiting. No more trusting doctors who didn't know her baby. No more letting strangers make her feel small. She would fight. She would find a way. She wiped her tears and stood, her eyes locked on the dark hallway leading to Sergio's room. Her body still ached, her heart still hurt, but her mind was clear. "I'm going to save you, baby," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm going to save you, even if I have to do it alone." Her fists clenched, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Strength. Real, unshakable strength. She sat at the kitchen table, pulled out her laptop, and began typing. The glow from the screen lit up her face as she searched, scrolling through page after page of medical forums, support groups, and blogs. Hours passed, and her eyes never left the screen. She clicked on a link titled, "Topical Steroid Withdrawal, What Doctors Don't Tell You." Her heart raced as she read. The words on the page felt like they had been written just for her. Her instincts had been right all along. Stephanie sat at the kitchen table, her eyes locked on the laptop screen. The soft glow of the monitor illuminated her face, highlighting the exhaustion in her eyes. Her fingers tapped frantically on the keyboard as she scrolled through forums, blogs, and medical articles. The words "topical steroid withdrawal" flashed across the screen. She read every line with laser focus, her heart pounding harder with every paragraph. Parents from all over the world shared their stories about how steroid creams had worsened their children's skin conditions instead of healing them. She saw photos of children with red, blistered, and peeling skin that looked eerily similar to Sergio's. Her heart clenched as she scrolled past photo after photo. It wasn't just her. She wasn't alone. Everything she had suspected was true. Her mind raced as she recalled the endless cycle she had been trapped in, applying the cream, seeing temporary relief, and then watching the rash come back worse than before. The pattern was clear now, and it made her feel sick to her stomach. The cream wasn't helping. It was hurting him. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of realization, of clarity. She had been right all along. Her instincts as a mother had been right. The doctors, the nurses, the so-called experts, they had all been wrong. They had failed her son. Her hands curled into fists on the table as a wave of anger surged through her body. She gritted her teeth, her jaw tight with determination. No more. No more creams. No more waiting for answers from people who didn't know her child. This time, she would be the one in control. Stephanie spent hours researching natural remedies. She read about essential oils, herbal balms, and homemade creams. Her eyes flicked across the screen, scanning for anything that might offer relief to her son. Memories of her old hobby, making candles, flashed through her mind. She remembered how she used to mix oils, waxes, and scents to create her own blends. The process wasn't much different from making balms and lotions. Her mind clicked. She could do this. She could make something for Sergio. She closed the laptop and stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Her body ached from sitting for so long, but she didn't care. She moved with purpose now. She grabbed a notepad and pen, scribbling down the ingredients she had seen in the articles: shea butter, coconut oil, beeswax, lavender oil, zinc oxide, and L lemongrass. Her handwriting was messy and rushed, but she didn't stop. Her mind was on fire with a single thought: I will save my son. The next day, Stephanie drove to the health store across town, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Her heart thudded in her chest with a mix of fear and hope. The store was small, but filled with shelves of oils, herbs, and natural skincare products. She moved quickly, grabbing jars of shea butter, bottles of essential oils, and small bags of dried herbs. Each item felt like a weapon she could use to fight for Sergio. When she placed everything on the counter, the cashier glanced at her with curiosity. "Making something special?" he asked, scanning the items. Stephanie nodded, her face serious. "Yeah," she said firmly, "something very special." Back at home, she cleared off the kitchen counter and laid out all the ingredients. Her notepad sat beside her, filled with scribbles and measurements. Marcus watched her from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. "You sure about this, Steph?" he asked cautiously. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady as stone. "I'm done waiting for help. I'm done trusting them. I'm doing this myself." Marcus watched her for a moment longer, then gave a slow nod. He walked over, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're stronger than you think." Those words echoed in her mind as she got to work. Stephanie melted the shea butter and coconut oil in a small pot on the stove, her eyes fixed on the swirling mixture. The scent of warm coconut filled the kitchen, blending with the sharp citrus tang of lemongrass oil. She added beeswax to thicken the mixture and stirred it slowly, watching the texture change from liquid to creamy. Her hands moved with precision, pouring the mixture into small glass jars she had cleaned and dried earlier. As the balms cooled, she wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, breathing in the subtle scent of lavender that now filled the room. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope. Later that night, she sat in the dimly lit living room with Sergio on her lap. His body was still wrapped in gauze, his breathing shallow but steady. Her heart ached as she unwrapped the cloth layer by layer, revealing his raw, cracked skin. Her fingers hovered over his arm, afraid to touch him, but she had no choice. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with love. "Mommy's here. I'm going to help you." Carefully, she dipped her fingers into the soft balm she had made just hours ago. She rubbed a small amount onto a patch of his skin, praying it wouldn't sting. Sergio whimpered but didn't cry. That was a good sign. She worked slowly, rubbing the balm into his arms, his chest, his legs, and his back. She moved with the precision of a surgeon, her eyes scanning every inch of his body for signs of pain. Her heart pounded as she watched his skin closely, searching for any reaction. For the first time in a long time, nothing bad happened. No blisters, no tears, no screaming, just silence. Days passed, and Stephanie continued to use the balm. Every day she checked his skin, rubbing a small amount into the rawest areas. She took pictures every morning and every night, tracking every inch of progress. The first few days, there wasn't much change, but on the 5th day, she saw it. A small patch of skin on his arm that wasn't red anymore. It was soft. It was normal. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears of relief. "Marcus," she called out, her voice trembling, "come look at this." Marcus rushed into the room, his eyes darting to where she was pointing. He knelt beside her, eyes narrowing as he inspected their son's arm. Slowly, he nodded. Yeah, I see it." His voice cracked as he smiled. "It's working, Steph. It's really working." For the next 10 months, Stephanie repeated the process every day. She didn't miss a single treatment. Morning and night, she applied the balm, checked his skin, and took photos. The red patches shrank little by little. The blisters stopped forming. His once raw skin began to heal. The cracked, dry texture became smooth and soft. Sergio began to smile again. His giggles returned, filling the house with a sound they hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Stephanie cried tears of joy as she watched him play with his sister Layla on the living room floor. She hugged Marcus tightly, whispering, "We did it." Months later, Stephanie sat in the same kitchen where she had once sobbed in despair. Now her heart was light and her spirit was strong. She flipped through the photo album on her phone, looking at the progression of Sergio's skin. From bright red blisters to smooth brown skin, the difference was night and day. Her smile grew wider with each picture. She had documented every step, every battle, every victory. Her little boy had healed, and it was all because she trusted herself. "You did it, Stephanie," she whispered to herself, feeling a rush of pride she hadn't felt in years. You didn't give up. Now Sergio was like any other toddler, full of energy, curiosity, and a little mischief. He ran around the house with Layla chasing after him, both of them laughing so loudly that it echoed through the house. Stephanie watched them from the kitchen, her heart full. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, leaning on the counter with a smile. Her eyes followed her son, taking in every moment of his joy. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from one of the mothers on the topical steroid forum. The message read, "How did you do it? What did you use? Please help me." Stephanie's eyes filled with tears as she typed her reply. "Trust yourself," she wrote back. "Don't give up. You know your child better than anyone. Follow your instincts and never stop fighting." Thank you for watching this powerful story. Sometimes life throws us challenges we never expect, but it's those moments that show us how strong we truly are. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want to see more inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next story.